Absalom, the treacherous son who stole his father's throne. The story of Absalom is an impressive story that makes us reflect on the complexities of human nature. She shows us how someone endowed with beauty and charisma can be consumed by ambition and the desire for revenge. Recorded in the second book of Samuel, this story goes beyond a simple historical account. It is a mirror that reflects the internal conflicts we all face. It begins with a prince loved by the people and ends with a civil war that divides a nation. Along the way, we see how small decisions can have devastating consequences. The saga of Absalom teaches about the dangers of pride, revenge, and excessive ambition. Despite taking place thousands of years ago, its lessons remain incredibly relevant. From birth, Absalom seemed destined for greatness. As the son of the renowned King David, he was born into privilege and power. In 2 Samuel 3:3, we read the first mention of him. The third was Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. This brief detail already reveals a lot about his lineage. Absalom was not only the son of one king, but also the grandson of another. This dual royal heritage certainly influenced his worldview and future aspirations. Growing up in an environment of power and authority, Absalom probably always saw himself as someone destined for great things. Perhaps he imagined surpassing even his father's achievements. The Bible highlights Absalom's physical appearance, a detail that becomes important throughout his career. In 2 Samuel 14:25-26, we find a detailed description of her beauty. The text says that in all Israel there was no man more admired for his appearance than Absalom. From head to toe, he was perfect. This was no ordinary beauty, but something that made people stop and look at it. In a society where appearance was often seen as a sign of divine favor, her beauty certainly contributed to her popularity. One of Absalom's most striking features was his hair. The Bible dedicates an entire verse to this detail, something that may seem irrelevant today, but had great cultural significance at the time. Still, in 2 Samuel 14:26, we read that Absalom cut his hair once a year when it became too heavy. The weight of her hair reached about 2 kilograms. This detail is not just a curiosity, but a symbol of strength and status. In many ancient cultures, hair was seen as a source of power and vitality. However, Absalom was not just admired for his appearance. He had a natural charisma that captivated people. Although the Bible does not explicitly mention this characteristic, we can infer it from his interactions with the people. Absalom had a remarkable ability to connect with people, making them feel valued and heard. This gift for interpersonal relationships would be crucial in his life as he began to build a base of support for his political ambitions. In addition to his beauty, his charm and eloquence made him a natural leader. His presence was magnetic, and people were naturally inclined to follow him. The people of Israel had a special affection for Absalom. His combination of beauty, charisma, and royal status made him an almost mythical figure in the eyes of the Israelites. When he walked the streets, he was admired and seen as hope for the nation's future. Unlike many members of royalty, Absalom seemed to understand the problems and aspirations of the people. He did not behave as someone distant and inaccessible, but as someone genuinely concerned about the well-being of citizens. This connection with the people would become a powerful weapon in his hands, which he would use with great skill to advance his interests. However, this love of the people for Absalom was a blessing and a curse. At the same time that it gave him power, it fed his ambition and his sense of right to the throne. His seemingly perfect life was about to be shaken by a family tragedy that would completely change the course of his story. The turning point in Absalom's life began with a dark event within the royal family itself. In 2 Samuel 13, the Bible recounts a tragic event involving his sister Tamar and his half-brother Amnon. In the very first verse, we find the root of the problem. Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of his half-brother Absalom. However, this was not a healthy passion, but an unhealthy desire that would lead to a terrible act. Amnon and Tamar were half-brothers, children of the same father, but different mothers. Even at that time, this relationship was considered unacceptable. Amnon's desire for Tamar was a time bomb ready to explode within the royal family. Driven by his obsession, Amnon devised a plan to be alone with Tamar. In 2 Samuel 13:6-7, he pretended to be sick and asked King David to send Tamar to care for him. "I'm sick," said Amnon. "Ask my sister Tamar to come and prepare something for me to eat, so that I can see her and eat from her hands." Without suspecting Amnon's true intentions, David complied with the request. This detail shows how, even though he was a wise king, David could be naive in family matters. When Tamar arrived thinking she was helping a sick brother, she found herself trapped in a horrible situation. In verses 11-14, the Bible describes Amnon's attack. When she offered him the food, he grabbed her and said, "Lie with me, my sister." Tamar resisted, begging Amnon not to do something so despicable, but ignoring her pleas, he raped her. This act not only destroyed Tamar's life, but it also cast a shadow over David's entire family. Upon learning what had happened, Absalom was filled with deep hatred, but instead of acting immediately, he remained silent and controlled his emotions. In 2 Samuel 13:20, we see her initial reaction. "Now be silent, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take it so personally." This speech may seem cold, but it reveals Absalom's strategic mind. He was not ignoring Tamar's pain, but planning his revenge carefully. Meanwhile, he took Tamar to live in his house, offering her protection. But inside him, a fire burned. Absalom's anger grew every day, but he knew that an impulsive attack could ruin his plans. So he waited patiently, fueling his desire for justice. When King David learned of Amnon's crime, his reaction was one of extreme indignation. Verse 21 says, "When King David heard all this, he was furious." However, surprisingly, David took no action against Amnon. This inaction only increased Absalom's revolt. How could the king, who should be an example of justice, allow such a serious crime within his own home to go unpunished? This moment marked a definitive turning point in the relationship between Absalom and his father. The respect he had for David began to turn into contempt. For 2 long years, Absalom held his grudge and meticulously planned his revenge. In 2 Samuel 13:23, we see the moment when he puts his plan into action. After 2 years, Absalom organized a feast for the sheep shearers and invited all the king's sons. The shearing of sheep was a celebratory event, and Absalom used this occasion as the perfect setting for his revenge. In verse 28, he gives precise instructions to his servants. "Be careful. When Amnon is drunk, and I give the order, kill him. Do not be afraid. I give the order. Be strong and courageous." Absalom had patiently waited for the right moment and was now ready to execute his personal justice. When Amnon was drunk and off guard, Absalom's servants attacked him, just as they had been instructed. Verse 29 describes the fatal moment. Then Absalom's servants killed Amnon, as Absalom had commanded. Amnon's murder not only avenged Tamar, but also completely altered the line of succession to the throne of Israel. With this act, Absalom crossed a point of no return. He was now not just a prince, but an assassin. After the crime, chaos took over the royal house. The king's other sons, terrified, fled to Jerusalem. Initially, a rumor spread that Absalom had killed all of the king's sons. Verse 30 says, "While they were still on their way, a report came to David. Absalom killed all the king's sons. None survived." Although this information was exaggerated, the reality was serious enough. David now had a dead son and another on the run. Absalom had murdered the heir apparent to the throne, and in doing so had declared war on his own family. Knowing he could not remain in Israel, Absalom fled to the kingdom of Geshur, where his maternal grandfather was king. In verse 37 we read, Absalom fled and went to Geshur, where he remained 3 years. Far from his homeland, Absalom had time to reflect on his actions and chart his next steps. Meanwhile, David mourned both the loss of Amnon and the absence of Absalom. Verse 39 reveals this emotional dilemma. King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had already consoled himself over the death of Amnon. This internal conflict between the pain of betrayal and the love of a father would shape the next chapters of this story. During these 3 years of exile, Absalom matured his political vision. He was no longer just a vengeful prince, but a strategist who began to think about the future of Israel. But even far away, Absalom still had a great asset, the love of the people. His return to Jerusalem would be just the first step towards his next big move, taking his father's throne. After 3 years of exile in Geshur, Absalom longed to return to Jerusalem. His impatience grew day by day, but he knew he couldn't just return without a strategy. Fortunately for him, Joab, the commander of David's army, realized that the king, despite everything, still missed his exiled son. In 2 Samuel 14, we see how Joab used a ruse to convince David to allow Absalom to return. He sent a wise woman from Tekoa to tell the king a story that mirrored the situation between David and Absalom. This woman said to the king, "May the king remember the Lord his God, so that the avenger of blood will not continue to destroy, so that my son will not be destroyed." The story touched David deeply and made him reflect on his own relationship with Absalom. Joab's plan worked. In 2 Samuel 14:21, David finally relents and commands, "Very well, I will do as you ask. Go and bring back young Absalom." This was the chance Absalom had been waiting for, but his return was not exactly as he imagined. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, he was not welcomed with open arms by David. The king, still resentful, imposed a harsh condition. "Let him return to his home, but he will not see my face." 2 Samuel 14:24. For 2 years, Absalom stayed in the city, but without being able to meet his father. This distancing only increased his frustration and his determination to seize power. Tired of waiting, he devised a way to get Joab's attention. As Joab ignored his requests for an audience, Absalom ordered his servants to set fire to a barley field belonging to the general. The strategy worked. Joab, furious, finally agreed to intercede with the king. David then allowed Absalom to appear before him. The reunion was full of emotion. Then the king called Absalom, who came and fell on his face before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. 2 Samuel 14:33. This gesture seemed to mean reconciliation, but Absalom had already drawn another path in his mind. He didn't just want to be accepted again. He wanted the throne. Now free to move around Jerusalem, Absalom began to put his strategy into practice to win the hearts of the people. He positioned himself at the city gates and intercepted those who came to seek justice from the king. In 2 Samuel 15:2-3 we read, "Early in the morning, Absalom would get up and stand by the road leading to the city gate. Whenever someone came to the king with a legal question, Absalom would call him and ask, 'Where do you come from?' Absalom said, 'Your cause is just and legitimate, but there is no one to represent you before the king.' With this behavior, Absalom began to sow doubts in the people's minds about David's ability to govern with justice. He not only criticized his father's administration, but also presented himself as the solution to the nation's problems. In verse 4, he states, If I were made a judge on earth, then anyone who had a just cause could come to me, and I would give him justice." In addition to words, Absalom reinforced his popularity with calculated gestures. Whenever anyone approached to pay him obeisance, he would receive them warmly, extending his hand and kissing them. This behavior quickly won over the people. In verse 6 we read, "In this way Absalom won the hearts of the men of Israel." This political campaign lasted 4 years. During this time, Absalom not only gained popular support, but also created a network of loyal followers spread throughout Israel. When he felt he had gathered enough strength, he took the next step. He asked David for permission to go to Hebron under the pretext of fulfilling a religious vow. Hebron, however, was the place where David had first been anointed king, and Absalom knew the symbolic weight of that city. David, without suspecting his son's true intentions, allowed his trip. At the right time, Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the land with the following instruction: "As soon as you hear the trumpet sound, say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron,' 2 Samuel 15:10. He also secured support from influential figures such as Ahithophel, one of David's wisest advisors. The conspiracy gained strength. In verse 12 we read, "And the conspiracy grew stronger, and the people who supported Absalom increased more and more." David finally received the news. His own son had declared himself king and gained enough support to take Jerusalem. A messenger told him, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." 2 Samuel 15:13. David, realizing that his position in the city was threatened, made a difficult decision: flee. He told his officers, "Let us arise and flee, for otherwise we will not escape Absalom." 2 Samuel 15:14. This moment was one of the most humiliating in David's life. The great king who had defeated Goliath and unified Israel now found himself forced to abandon his own throne in the face of his son's rebellion. While David fled with his faithful followers, Absalom marched to Jerusalem and took control of the city. Absalom's coup appeared to have been a success. He was about to face his father in a final confrontation that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Absalom now occupied Jerusalem. His coup seemed successful, but he still needed to eliminate the threat from his father, David. Meanwhile, David and his followers were on the run. However, even in exile, the king still had loyal allies and his vast military experience. One of these allies was Hushai, an advisor whom David sent back to Jerusalem as a spy. His mission was to feign loyalty to Absalom and sabotage the new king's plans. The first major dilemma for Absalom was the advice of Ahithophel, his most experienced strategist. Ahithophel suggested an immediate attack to capture David while he was still weakened. "I will choose 12,000 men, and this night I will pursue David." 2 Samuel 17:1. This swift attack could have secured Absalom's victory. However, Hushai intervened and advised a different strategy. He suggested that Absalom gather a larger army before attacking, giving David time to reorganize. Hushai's advice was accepted, delaying the offensive and allowing David to mount his defense. While Absalom hesitated, David and his soldiers strengthened themselves. The king chose trusted commanders and divided his troops into strategic groups. Before the final battle, David made a moving request to his generals: "Treat Absalom gently for my sake." 2 Samuel 18:5. Even after all the betrayal, David still loved his son and hoped to spare him. But on the battlefield, there would be no mercy. The battle in the forest of Ephraim. The decisive confrontation took place in the forest of Ephraim. David's forces, more experienced and better organized, quickly gained an advantage over Absalom's soldiers. Verse 7 describes the scale of the defeat. There the army of Israel was defeated by the soldiers of David, and that day there was great slaughter. 20,000 men fell in battle. The very atmosphere of the battle seemed to conspire against Absalom. Verse 8 says, "The battle spread throughout the region, and the forest consumed more men than the sword." It was in the midst of this confusion that Absalom's fate was sealed. As he fled on horseback, he passed under a large tree, and his long hair got caught in the branches. Verse 9 describes the scene. Absalom was suspended between heaven and earth while his horse rode on. This moment is full of irony. His beauty, which helped him win over the people, was now the cause of his downfall. He was left hanging, helpless, awaiting his fate, the death of Absalom. Joab, David's general, ignored the king's order and decided to end the war once and for all. He took 3 darts and plunged them into Absalom's heart. His soldiers followed suit and killed him right there. Then Joab took 3 darts and thrust them into Absalom's heart, while he was still alive in the tree. 2 Samuel 18:14. The rebellious prince who dreamed of taking the throne died suspended among the branches, abandoned and betrayed by his own destiny. After Absalom's death, Joab ordered his body thrown into a pit and covered with stones, a humiliating end for someone who aspired to kingship. Meanwhile, Absalom's soldiers, upon learning of his death, fled, thus ending the civil war. When the news reached David, he did not celebrate the victory. On the contrary, he was overcome by an overwhelming sadness. In verse 33, we read one of the most moving scenes in the Bible. Then the king, deeply shaken, went up to the room above the city gate and wept. As he walked, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, I wish I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Even after all the rebellion, betrayal, and war, David did not see Absalom as an enemy, but as his beloved son. His lament was so intense that it left his soldiers demoralized. Joab had to intervene, reminding David that he owed gratitude to those who fought for him. "Today you shamed all your soldiers, who saved your life and that of your family." 2 Samuel 19:5. David then recovered and resumed government, but the loss of Absalom left deep scars. The civil war left Israel divided. Many tribes were still uncertain about who they should follow. David had to work hard to restore unity to the kingdom. Despite his victory, he was never the same. His reign continued, but the events with Absalom served as a bitter reminder of the consequences of past mistakes. The episode revealed not only Absalom's flaws, but also David's weaknesses: his inaction in the face of Amnon's crime, his hesitation in disciplining Absalom, and his difficulty in balancing the role of father and king. Absalom's story has become a symbol of the dangers of uncontrolled ambition and disobedience, but also of the pain that betrayal can cause within a family. Even centuries later, his trajectory continues to be studied as a powerful example of the dilemmas of power, justice, and paternal love. The story of Absalom teaches us several valuable lessons. Limitless ambition can be destructive. Absalom had charisma, beauty, and popular support, but his impatience and desire for power led to his downfall. Forgiveness and discipline must go together. David loved Absalom, but his hesitancy to correct him early allowed the situation to spiral out of control. Betrayal and conflict can destroy families. The lack of justice in Tamar's case and Amnon's murder created a cycle of revenge and destruction. Pride before the fall. The same Absalom who stole the people's hearts ended up suspended between the branches of a tree, defeated by his own arrogance. In the end, this story serves as a reminder that impulsive decisions and unresolved feelings can lead to disastrous consequences. May we learn from Absalom and David, seeking balance between justice, discipline, and mercy in our own lives. If you liked this analysis, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more biblical content like this. Turn on notifications and share with your friends so more people can learn from this powerful story. See you in the next video.